George R.R. Martin regrets killing a character. Now, this is not news. This is something that came out that he had said to a fellow author in a conversation about 7 years ago. And there's been a good amount of speculation on this topic in the time since that has come to the public attention. There are a number of great videos on YouTube that I'll link in the description that also discuss it, but I think it's an interesting idea that bears some consideration for the future of the series. Martin gets this perception as someone who's really bloodthirsty and will really kill characters at a drop of a hat, but that really isn't the case. Over the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire, we've only had about 4 viewpoint characters die, 5 if you count Jon. In addition to that, while some minor characters die fairly frequently, there are a lot of them that seem to be at least ambiguous or just drop out of the story rather than just being killed on screen. The way Martin says that he regrets killing a character clearly indicates this is someone who is vital to plots going forward and that has been written in a way that he truly cannot undo it. So today I'm going to speculate on who exactly that character might be. So, what exactly was said before we get into specific character speculation? When in conversation with fellow author Diana Gabeldron, I hope I'm saying that correctly, I don't think I am, George is quoted as saying the following. He said he's in all kinds of trouble, that he's killed someone off that he later realized he's needed. The fellow author says that's never happened to them, and he says that he's painted himself into a corner on this, which is interesting. So, this is somebody who he didn't realize was essential at the time that he killed them, but in the time that has developed since, he realizes that it has grown a lot more difficult to write the story in this character's absence. It's also crucial to think about the timeline here. It comes from 2018, 2017, which was somehow around 7 years ago. I don't know how that happened, but regardless of that, this puts it pretty squarely in the Winds of Winter territory. When looking at the chronology of the series as a whole, I find it hard to believe that somebody he killed off any earlier than the very end of A Storm of Swords would have regrets manifesting specifically at this point that wouldn't have manifested earlier on in the series and that we wouldn't have heard about during his lead up to A Feast for Crows or A Dance with Dragons. The fact that we're hearing about it now does signal the fact that it's very likely to be coming from a character killed off during the chronology of the last book. And of course, since we're dealing with The Song of Ice and Fire, the chronology of the last book means the chronology of the last 2 books, as A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons occupy the same time space, essentially. So we're looking for somebody who was killed off during those 2 novels who is definitely dead. There's no out they couldn't miraculously survive from whatever might have pushed them off page. I should ask, who do you think George shouldn't have killed, either for the sake of his writing or just because you like them that much? Before getting into who I think it is, I'd like to go over who I think it's not. I don't think it's anybody in or around the city of Meereen. I've seen some people pitch Quentin. I've seen Quentin be struck down for being too ambiguous. I don't necessarily see the ambiguity there, but I think that killing someone in Meereen would honestly benefit Martin more than it would hurt him. It would free up certain writing possibilities, as there is kind of a glut of viewpoint characters there that has caused him many, many problems in the past, and I think that one way out of that is to kill off viewpoints. And I think that that is going to very likely happen going into the Winds of Winter as well. I think that Quentin dying is a very concise and well-structured arc, and I don't think he would have much role to play in the future of Meereen, besides maybe complicating it further and making it even harder to write. So I don't think he necessarily will regret it. And I think that he is probably going to move to kill other characters as well, probably Barristan in my mind, but I don't think it's anybody in or around that very complex region right now. I've also seen people speculate Arys Oakheart, and I don't think it's him for a couple reasons. There is some regret lingering in George R. R. Martin about Arys Oakheart. He's spoken at a panel in the past on how he's unsure if Arys should have been a viewpoint character, but I don't think that regret equates to regret for killing him off, as Dorne kind of has everything it needs at this point. We have Arion acting as a political extension to the Aegon plot and the Stormlands, and we have Ario Hota venturing out to find Darkstar, which I think is a very natural progression of the events that are going on there and exactly what's happening with his character specifically. The only eventuality I could see Arys' presence being necessary for was if it was super needed to have somebody in Sunspear to figure out what's happening there in the Winds of Winter, but I think that if Ario Hota survives, he's definitely going to return there. And I think being able to be in contact with Duran via Arion's perspective, via Raven, does make sense and wouldn't be that much to regret. It is worth noting that in past drafts, Arys was intended to survive and duel his fellow brother of the Kingsguard, Balon Swan. But if they did end up dueling, I'm not confident that Arys would have survived that incident. I think, if anything, it'd be kind of a farewell, my brother situation where maybe they kill each other. I do think that Martin has some regrets about killing Arys Oakheart. The way it was done was a bit rushed and almost forced at a point, but I think that to say that he is the character that Martin is talking about in this quote misunderstands the meaning of the author here. Martin isn't saying that he misses writing the character or he wishes he could have done the death better or had another story angle go on from there, but he's saying that he regrets killing a character off because their absence is creating a void in the story that really nobody else can fill. It's a writing complication, nothing more. When looking at this, one name keeps popping up again and again. I believe it's the main conclusion that the Preston Jacobs video comes to on the subject, that being Kevan Lannister, which does make sense. Kevan is the most recently killed character in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's our epilogue viewpoint in A Dance with Dragons, and he dies at the very, very, very end of that chapter via being stabbed by a bunch of Varys' little birds after catching a crossbow bolt to the chest, and kind of a mirror to his brother Tywin. With that said, I don't necessarily think it's Kevan. It could be. I think there are definitely complications raised from Kevin's death, most likely the kind of situation surrounding Cersei and King's Landing and her political kind of minefield she is currently walking. There is a very little possibility she gets out of what she's currently involved in unharmed and unscathed, and I think that Kevin's death very much complicates things in that she has pretty much no allies at court except for maybe Qyburn right now. But I don't think that Kevan is that character necessarily, because Kevan is the epilogue viewpoint character. This is something that Martin had a lot of time to sit with and consider. He wasn't killed on a whim. He was kind of written and built up to be this final push towards Varys' agenda here. And I think it does make sense for Kevan to die at this stage of the story. Varys is right. He is binding the realm together too much. And I think with Kevan, there might be more resistance to the Golden Company's invasion than he wants to see in the Aegon story, as I think Aegon's tale, is going to be one of rapid ascent and then rapid descent. And I think that if Kevan is in the way, he is going to be a massive roadblock to that ascent. I think there's a far more compelling candidate in the exact same chapter I was just discussing. Kevan was the epilogue viewpoint. He was someone who a lot of importance was shown on his death. We are in his head, we are feeling his feelings, we are seeing his dying thoughts and words. Pycelle, on the other hand, does not receive such an honor. He is just kind of sitting in a room that Kevan walks into right before Kevan dies, and then Kevan sees that his brains have been bashed in. No final words, no final actions. Pycelle is just dead, and that's just that. He's one of very few characters we've seen in every single book so far, and he's a pretty unique perspective. I think that if we are considering the Lannister political state in the capital at the end of A Dance with Dragons and beginning of The Winds of Winter, I think that it's a lot less of a quagmire if Pycelle is alive, and that he could be at least some constant presence and voice of reason to maybe guide things back in Cersei's direction. He's obviously not Kevan. He's not a family member of Cersei's pulling for Cersei's. He's been kind of shat upon by her for an entire book at this point. But I do think that him kind of guiding the Lannisters through this time would very much make sense. And I think he's a character that really could have a lot more to give in the story. There's some very interesting theories that have come out recently, one by a friend of the channel, about his parentage and his role in the narrative leading up to A Dance with Dragons, and to have him killed off screen is just kind of unceremonious and anticlimactic, and I've never been that huge of a fan of it. I think that maybe he could have had a larger role to play in The Winds of Winter, but I don't think he's the most likely candidate. For my money, I think that the character that George Martin regrets killing is Maester Aemon Targaryen for two main reasons, one of which I've never really heard discussed before. First and foremost, he is such a unique perspective. Pycelle is very old and has a lot of knowledge built up unto him as the Grand Maester, and given that he's seen so much and lived for so long, being appointed by Aegon V, Maester Aemon is in that boat and even further, in that he is such a unique perspective, this individual who should have been a Targaryen king, but went to the wall instead and lived through all of these conflicts, even corresponding with Rhaegar and talking about prophecy. I think that there is so much story potential in what Aemon knows, and he could be a vehicle to deliver so much relevant information to so many characters. We see at the end of his life in A Feast for Crows that he begins to get fixated on Daenerys Targaryen. And if Aemon had actually made that journey to Daenerys, so much knowledge could have been shared about the Targaryen dynasty as a whole, about her brother Rhaegar, and Aemon could have been the individual to bring Jon Snow to the attention of Daenerys Targaryen. These two characters are our central players in this grand design. They are fire and ice, and there has to be some point of connection between the two. Without Aemon, that point of connection is a little more wibbly wobbly. Tyrion has definitely met Jon and interacted with Jon, but he really doesn't think about the Bastard of the North that much. I think he has more of an impact on Jon than Jon has on him. So more likely he'd know a little bit if Jon were independently brought to Dany's attention, but Aemon could be this individual to bring Jon to Dany's sightline. I think there's another angle there, though. I think that Aemon kind of domino affects other characters in his death in a way that Martin maybe regrets. With Aemon dying, he very clearly still wants there to be a Maester with the Daenerys camp for some reason or another. It makes sense. Any king or queen in Westeros tends to have a Maester. Any lord or lady in Westeros tends to have a Maester. So, in response to this, rather than sending Aemon over, essentially as soon as Sam arrives in Old Town, Maester Marwyn rushes off to greet Daenerys, and he has not yet arrived in Meereen as of the end of A Dance with Dragons. I think that Martin might regret doing that. Sam is currently at the Citadel and kind of rudderless. He doesn't really have anybody to mentor him outside of Alros and Lazy Leo. All of these students of Marwyn the Mage are there to help him out, but the man himself is absent. I think that Martin might regret having a Maester Marwyn just completely removed from the Sam storyline, where he could be such an interesting and cool influence on this very bookish character, and just kind of plopping him into Daenerys' view, which is already occupied by characters as strange as or stranger than Marwyn the Mage. So overall, I think that is another angle that needs to be considered here too. Ultimately, it's unclear which character this is going to be. We don't know much about what is going to be crucial in the Winds of Winter. We could all be focusing on exactly the wrong things. But for my money, I would put probably about 70% on Maester Aemon, 30% on Grand Maester Pycelle, as I think that they are both very uniquely situated characters who are both very old. And I think that both of them dying probably cuts off some very significant knowledge that Martin maybe wanted to include in the future of the story. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It really helps grow the channel, and I'll have many more videos out specifically for you on House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and Dunk and Egg in the very near future. Thank you very much for the support on recent videos as well, and for those who don't know, I also just started a Patreon where I have access to a Discord and early videos and what have you, all the typical stuff if you want to help support this channel and help pay for my law school. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you soon. Goodbye, everyone.